So this was Norm Grabowski's car. Norm was an actor in Hollywood, and he was a street rodder, hot rodder at the time. And Norm built this car secretly, and it was the first real T-bucket. And this is pretty much exactly restored to how Norm built the car back in 1957. And it set the hot rod world afire, literally, with the way it looked. And you can tell it was a super nice hot rod. I mean, from all the chrome, the colors, the flames, taking all the fenders off. That had never really been done outside of the Lakes cars, where they were using dragsters or drag cars for the street, taking them out to La Mirage or out to the dry lakes and taking the fenders off. But this was a street version of that, and it was super successful, and started a trend all over the country that people were building T-buckets because they were easy to build and cheap to build. And this was the best example in the country at the time, was Norm Grabowski's. And Norm was very popular with everybody that he ever met. He was a great guy. He used to hand carve, if you can see the skull shift knob up there, Norm carved those, and he carved them for the rest of his life. Everybody wanted a Norm Grabowski, shift handle. So a pretty neat guy. Norm was a neat guy. So now we're here at Tommy Ivo's car, and it's fitting that we're here next to Norm's car. It's so fantastic. They sit next to each other at Pomona at the NHRA Museum, but they have a lot of history together. So Norm built the Kooky car first. Tommy Ivo was a local drag racing hero, and he was also a big-time actor. He was on TV most of his life, and in movies, westerns mostly, all through the 40s and early 50s, and they started calling him TV Tommy Ivo. And he raced Buicks, and at the time Buick Nailheads were the car to beat. They were super fast, they just were reliable, really strong. Well, Tommy had these motors available to him because he was racing. Well, he saw Norm Grabowski's car driving around Burbank, and he decided, man, Norm, what did you do here? Show me how your dimensions on how you made this thing. And Norm told him, no, I'm not going to tell you, that's how I built this, my secret. So Tommy was like, wow, I really want to know about that. So Tommy got Norm, knew where Norm was going to be one evening, and he snuck over to Norm's mother's house and took a tape measure and took all the measurements of Norm's car, and he ended up building the Tommy T. And then when Norm found out about it, that it was done, Tommy shows up at the same place, and Norm wasn't very happy about it. So a little grudge thing started between the two of them, and it played out for everybody in the country on the pages of Hot Rod magazine. And they ended up at the drag strip, Norm against Tommy, and Tommy ended up being the victor. The car was a little bit faster than Norm, and they were really good friends anyway, and they stayed that till Norm passed. And Tommy is still one of the great all-time drag champions of NHRA, and his other nemesis was Big Daddy Don Garlits all over the country. Don even had similar hot rods back in Florida. And a funny story also that ties this together, all these guys were tied together. Big Don Garlits came to California at one point, drag racing, and he met Big Daddy Roth. And Ed also had a T-bucket at the time called Tweety Pie, which was a purple, kind of outrageous but more normal. So they all hung out. But anyway, when Big Daddy Don Garlits came to California, he met Big Daddy Roth, and he told him, he says, hey, I don't want to take your name or anything, but I'm Big Daddy Don from drag race. He said, I know who you are, and I'm Big Daddy out here. And he said, I'll be Big Daddy in the West Coast, you be Big Daddy on the East Coast. And they became very good friends, and Ed Roth's drag car, the dragster, the Fang, is in Don Garlett's museum in Alcoa right now, and you can go see it. You know, if you're ever at the drag racing museum that Don Garlett's has, it's a wonderful place. And all these cars can be seen by the public at different museums: Peterson's, Galpin, and in Reno. So you can actually go see these cars, and they all tie in together because they were all built by guys that hung out together, were friends. They were competitors at shows and things, but they never, ever that I know of, had any grudges. One final story I've just got to relate to you guys. So, like I said, all these guys hung out together. They were the pioneers of car shows and drag racing and the Bonneville Salt Flats and any kind of motorsport stuff you can think of. And one thing that they all shared in common was an event that happened one time and one time only. In 1959, a local promoter in LA was trying to put together different shows, and he had a friend that worked for Disney at Disneyland, and he pitched the idea of having a car show at Disneyland on Main Street. And these two cars both were there: Tommy Ivo's car, Norm Grabowski's car, George Barish brought a car, Ed Roth brought a car, and all the other local big-time rod builders at the time. So they have this car show on Main Street, and it went well for the day. It's a little different crowd than these guys were used to hanging out with, because the general public at the time, the powers that be, thought these were all hot rod hooligans and was kind of trying to outlaw them. But they stayed at it. So after the show, there was maybe a little bit of inebriation and some burnt rubber, and Mr. Disney didn't appreciate it, so they were never invited back to Disneyland. And that is one of the reasons why Ratfink was invented, because Ed developed a dislike at the time for Mickey, and so Ratfink became his version of anti-Mickey, with the sweat and the flies, and you could just imagine that big stinky rat. Everything opposite of what Mickey was. He was, at the end of the day, a very big Disney fan, and he used to go to Disneyland a lot more than he'd want to admit, I'm sure.